Hello, everybody. So this is video lecture 1 in the chapter on race and ethnicity. This is chapter 11 in the OpenStax textbook and chapter 12 in the hardback Henslin textbook. Race and ethnicity is, I'm sure I've said this before, one of my favorite chapters. When I became a sociologist, when I was choosing, when I fell in love with this way of thinking about the world, I was really more interested in social class. Of course, I continue to be interested in social class. And then my intellectual interest shifted to gender, as both of those things were my lived experience. And I was a little slow. I was reluctant to get to the chapter on race because it was something that I did not understand and had to really learn about. It was the last content that, as a white woman, that I came to. Since then, I consume all kinds of sociology of race stuff, and I consider myself to be an anti-racist, which I will talk about later on. I was sort of under the notion that I did not have a racialized experience, and in fact, I do, and I'll talk more about that later. The big sociological point when we talk about race and ethnicity, first of all, those are two different things. Just like when we were discussing sex and gender, those are two different things. There's even kind of a parallel to them, and I'll get to that in a second as well. But race, like gender, is a social construct. It is an idea. It is an idea that is so embedded in our culture that we don't even recognize it as an idea, just the same way we talk about gender. To sort of illustrate that point, many years ago I ran across this image. It's to illustrate the idea that the idea of race changes, right? Because that's what ideas do. They change over time. And if you can zoom in and see these images, you have people of different complexions, because in our culture we think about race as defined by one's complexion, the color of one's skin. And on their t-shirts, are years and what they would be identified as. So I can use this lady right here. It says in 1860 she was black, in 1950 she was Negro, and then in 1990 we called her black again. So she wouldn't have changed. It was just the way that we define people. This one is in 1870. She's Chinese in 1980, and this is referring to things like the census, or the official way that we identify people. And then in 2000, she's Asian. So she's Chinese, and then other in 1980, and 2000 she's Asian. Which actually, when we talk about race, when we get to the topic of race and ethnicity, Asian doesn't even fall under a category necessarily of race. What's some others? Slave, mulatto, Negro, Japanese, Korean, Asian. That's an interesting one because those refer to where people come from. Now look at this guy, right? So here you go. We have a Hispanic, black on this one. We have an African American on this one. But if you look at this guy, right, the white guy in the picture, in 1790, he's a free white. In 1880, he's white. And in 1970, he's also white. And one of the things that's interesting about the way that we label social groups based on this idea of race is only really for white people do we not refer to a place. So we'll make reference to dark-skinned people, Africans, black people, and I'm going to be using the term black and white. And we'll call them African Americans, but I don't have to identify myself as European Americans. And Africa is a very, very big place. So what part of Africa? And there's lots of different kinds of people in Africa. All right, so let's talk about where this idea or this definition of race, this idea of race came from and what we mean. Our culture. So race is interesting in that if you were to travel around the world, and of course at different points and at different times in history, the physical characteristics, so what distinguishes ethnicity from race is based on a biological idea or a biological differences. Those differences are real, but we as a culture decide that those real biological differences are significant. In our culture, we use skin color. Historically, we've used skin color. Other parts of the world, it was maybe the texture of one's hair, the width of one's nose, the thickness of one's lips. Indeed, that's what Hitler's people were doing, is they were measuring lips. And if you had certain facial structures, you were considered Aryan. If you had other facial structures, you were considered another racial group. So here's some definitions. human race, and this is taken from your OpenStax textbook, right, is a grouping of humankind. So as opposed to we are Homo sapiens, as opposed to Neanderthals, we are a grouping of humankind based on a shared physical or social quality, and that varies from one society to another society. So the physical, it can be a physical difference, but that physical difference may be meaningless in one part of the world and have significance in another part of the world. So skin color is one of those things that you go to other parts of the world and skin color doesn't separate you. It may be other or social qualities. We say this is socially constructed, another really important idea that I have talked about in other semester and other chapters. I sure hope you're grasping what we mean, what is meant by social construct. It is an idea that is created by society, by people, right? That's what we mean. It's constructed socially. So it's constructed by society. It's a idea that is collectively constructed, and we all know what it means. All over American culture, American society, we know or we understand the idea of race. We understand we understand that we place different meanings and values on people that are white and on people that are black, or people that are persons of color. That's an interesting phrase that when I was coming of age, we did not use that phrase, but that since to refer to people of color is an acceptable definition or is an acceptable way. And so I will use white and black because I am describing the way people look, and our culture, the way people look, the complexion of their skin, that's what is considered meaningful in our culture. So it is an idea imposed upon powerful people, and what we mean by that. So the history of the idea of white and black has its origins in slavery. Two really good books on this topic. One I'm listening to right now, and it's called Caste. Another one is the 1619 Project. And what they describe is the reason that we came as a society to distinguish people who are I'm not white, I'm kind of a pinkish color, right? That the reason we came to distinguish people who are quote unquote white and people who are quote unquote black, even though people don't usually look like my black t-shirt, is because it was a shortcut to say people that look like this were free people, and if you looked like that, we could treat you different. So it's all got its origins in slavery. When people of dark complexion showed up, we could treat them differently. We thought about them differently. Indeed, we didn't even think of them as people. We didn't think of them as people. Some treated them as they didn't have feelings, like they couldn't literally feel pain. They had different status. In the book I was listening to this morning, they were saying that slavery expanded or lasted for 12 generations. And so much like we would think about animals or livestock, the descendants of two slaves, the descendants of them were also considered what we call chattel slavery. So chattel is the idea that one group of people can own another, or that something can be owned. So our culture, our American history is founded on the notion and an economic system where white folk owned black people, and black people were considered less than. They were considered property and closer to animals than they were to people. And I'm getting kind of ahead of myself. Okay, so that's what we mean. An idea imposed on the powerless by the powerful. The powerful white people impose the idea of race and say to the less powerful people, this is the group you are in, this is the group you are in, this is the group you are in, and they are ranked. And it is an idea embedded in our culture. It is so pervasive and profound. We don't even necessarily recognize how race is embedded. In this book again I was listening to this morning, she was talking specifically about the caste system in India, and she was observing how people from one group, literally like their body language, the way they move through space, the way they stand compared next to each other, is different depending upon what group they are in. So this notion of some groups are better than others is so embedded in our psyche and embedded in our individual concepts of self. It becomes part of our body language, and we don't even realize it. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and in the next slide, I will talk about how race is both a myth and a reality.